To hear exclusive audiobooks not available on YouTube, visit the links in the description below. Thank you for your support. Japan's Biological Warfare in China by Yanjun. Chapter 5. The U.S. Military's Investigation, Cover-up and Duplicity. On August 15, 1945, Japanese Emperor Hirohito declared unconditional surrender, thereby bringing an end to World War II. That same day, U.S. President Truman signed an order designating General MacArthur as the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Far East and the representative of the U.S. government, who eventually presided over the surrender ceremony on the USS Missouri on September 2nd and led the handling of post-war affairs concerning Japan. The investigation of Japanese biological warfare by the U.S. military started in September 1945 and lasted until the end of the Tokyo trials in November 1948. During these 4 years, Japan and the U.S. reached clandestine deals by which the U.S. granted immunity to those responsible for Unit 731 in exchange for the results of its human experimentation, biological experimentation, germ warfare, and gas experimentation. As a result, the members of Unit 731 escaped the trials of the International Military Tribunal of the Far East. After the end of World War II, Shiro Ishii, Masaji Kitano, and most other members of Unit 731 fled back to Japan. To cover up their involvement in Unit 731 and to avoid the post-war trials, they chose to live in seclusion or with changed names and even faked death. At the time when the Cold War landscape was forming, communist movements were on an upsurge worldwide. The U.S. spearheaded the Tokyo trials, targeting Japanese war criminals in order to promote its own ideology and political system. Meanwhile, to acquire information about Unit 731's work, the U.S. military contacted Shiro Ishii, Masaji Kitano, and others in secret before the Tokyo trials. U.S. intelligence agencies constantly followed and investigated Shiro Ishii and others, interviewing at least 25 Unit 731 members. U.S. intelligence agencies tracking down Shiro Ishii. According to the records of the Supreme Command of the Allied Forces,
on December 3, 1945, the following information was obtained from confidential informant 8011 of this office during the course of an investigation. On November 10, 1945, subject, allegedly a large landowner in Chiba Prefecture and a former lieutenant general of the Army Surgeons Corps of the Japanese Army, was proclaimed dead and his funeral observed in Chiyoda-mura, Yamatake-gun, Chiba. It is claimed that subject was the commanding officer of the Ishii detachment of the Surgeons Corps during the war, and that he carried out human experimentation during the war.
On December 3, 1945, less than 3 months before the Tokyo trials, Shiro Ishii faked his death. But no more than 20 days later, U.S. intelligence agents were already aware of the truth. There was also a memorandum on December 3rd recording information about Shiro Ishii.
Ishii BWA, Bacterial War Army, was established in Harbin under commandership of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii. A large bacterial laboratory built in Harbin succeeded in cultivating pest in 1944 December. Pest was applied to Manchurians. In Mukden was applied to several American citizens captured during the war. For experiment aims, rats implanted with pest were dispersed in and around Mukden, as a result of which it was proved successful. When Ishii, after these experiments, was about to start actual manufacturing in large-scale war, termination was declared. Japanese Army bombarded the laboratory wherein most precious documents and equipment were destroyed, together with hundreds of laboratory members engaged in study. The research works were conducted in cooperation with Tokyo and Kyoto universities, medical laboratories.
By that time, The U.S. Army was in the know about Shiro Ishiu's major activities, especially the Harbin Lab, human experimentation, biological warfare, and information about its cooperative research with Kyoto universities, all of which involved top secrets about Unit 731's human experimentation and biological warfare. According to an informant on December 28, 1945,
This officer took possession of a large sum of money, about 1 million yen, when he left.
the informant was shocked that Shiro Ishii had not been arrested as a war criminal, according to intelligence from January 7, 1946.
Investigation was initiated by the Investigations Officer, 441st CIC Detachment, upon receipt of radiogram MX91659, dated January 6, 1946, which requested the apprehension and interrogation of Ishii in connection with his activities in directing biological warfare experiments in Manchuria. The General Headquarters records failed to reveal the whereabouts of Shiro Ishii and require the Japanese government to arrest him and extradite him to the U.S. Army.
On January 7, 1946, U.S. intelligence visited Ralph Teetsorth, director of the United Forces Association, and S.E. Whitesides, director of the Chemistry Division of the General Headquarters, in the Tokyo Broadcasting Building. Teetsorth provided the information that
Experimenters under Ishii had inoculated American and Chinese POWs with bubonic plague virus during experiments.
Whitesides offered information about Shiro Ishii's biological warfare and the Kwantung Army's Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, while the U.S. had no idea about Shiro Ishii's location and activities. So on January 11th, 4 days after Whitesides gave the information, he interviewed Masaji Kitano, from whom he obtained further information about Unit 731's germ experimentation and bombs, but not about Shiro Ishii's whereabouts. The U.S. intelligence agencies were closely tracking Shiro Ishii and searching for more information about human experimentation. They asked Teetsorth not to publicize the information in his possession to prevent questions about the whereabouts of Shiro Ishii from becoming a focus of attention for the U.S. Army. On January 8th, a U.S. informant revealed the whereabouts of Shiro Ishii.
Ishii returned and is said to have reported to Tatsuo Ishikawa, professor of pathology at Kanazawa Medical College, near Kanazawa City. Ishii is said to be hiding somewhere near or in Kanazawa.
On January 9th, the U.S. Army got the following information through the Central Liaison Office, Tokyo.
The Imperial Japanese government will immediately escort Major General Ishii to Tokyo and hold him at the disposal of General Headquarters, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers. The Imperial Japanese government will advise this headquarters immediately upon General Ishii's arrival in Tokyo and will report in detail, giving the present whereabouts of General Ishii, reason for non-appearance and date by which his arrival may be expected, provided he has not reached Tokyo by 2400 hours on January 16, 1946.
At that point, neither the U.S. occupation nor the Japanese authorities could confirm the whereabouts of Shiro Ishii, although it could be that the Japanese government was intentionally concealing this information. On January 19th, the International Military Tribunal of the Far East was established, and its charter was defined. With the Tokyo trials about to begin, the deadline the Japanese government pledged was January 16th. Later, the Central Liaison Office Tokyo contacted Tatsuo Ishikawa, professor of pathology at Kanazawa Medical College, about Ishii's whereabouts as a gesture, but failed to obtain any useful information. U.S. intelligence agencies assumed that the Central Liaison Office Tokyo couldn't report the whereabouts of Ishii and the date of his arrival in Tokyo to the U.S. occupation authorities. Information from January 21st stated,
Reference is made to check sheet from G2 and requests information pertaining to Japanese biological warfare activities. Additional information will be forwarded as available.
On February 5th, The U.S. Army located Shiro Ishii, and Thompson started to interview him. On February 16th, the Civil Intelligence Section of the General Headquarters received from the Second General Staff a list of 25 names possibly connected with Shiro Ishii, including Masaji, Kanji Ishiwara, Ryoichi Naito, Hojo Rondo, Eiji Nishimura, and Hisato Yoshimura. The information indicated that the interrogation of Shiro Ishii was ongoing, but that as yet no materials about human experimentation had been obtained. U.S. intelligence designed the contents of the interrogation.
Who were Ishii's backers in high government circles? By what means did Ishii acquire the large funds which were apparently at his disposal? What is his reputation in Chiyoden-mura, Yamatake-gun, Chiba Prefecture? Is he a large landowner there? How was the manufacture and sale to the public of the Ishii water filter handled, and by whom?
Based on this information, we can conclude that the U.S. Army had not yet obtained the data about biological weapons and human experimentation it was seeking, and that the U.S. Army would continue individual investigations into Shiro Ishii and all the others listed by the Second General Staff of General Headquarters. According to information obtained on March 11th,
Subject has been in Tokyo for some time, being interrogated by G2 Technical Intelligence, is returning to his home in Chiba Prefecture. He has been instructed to report to your headquarters and make known his address. Technical Intelligence should want to again interrogate him. He will be readily available. March 16th. Subject has not reported his whereabouts to your detachment as suggested in recent letter, being confined to bed with illness in Tokyo. His wife advised this headquarters today that as soon as he is able to travel, he will proceed to his home in Chiba and report to your office. April 1st. As yet, Ishii has not reported to this HQ to make known his address.
secret investigations and interrogations by the U.S. military. Murray Sanders investigation. Before the end of World War II, the U.S. Armed Forces had already been informed that Japan had carried out biological warfare in Hunan and Zhejiang of China. After the end of the war, the U.S. disclosed this piece of so-called confidential information and attempted to get hold of the situation of Japan's biological warfare and various related experiments through numerous channels. Shortly after Japan surrendered, Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders arrived in Japan. As an expert in biological warfare from the U.S. Dietrich base, he carried out investigations into Japan's biological warfare in September and October of 1945. In Tokyo, he inquired members of Tokyo Army Medical School, Imperial Army General Staff Office of Japan, and the Medical Board of Ministry of War, as well as important members of Unit 731, such as Ryoichi Naito, Garudo Junichi, and Masuda Tomosada, but not Shiro Ishii, who had already fled back to Japan. On November 1st, Sanders completed his report. The report covered the scope of research, systems of command, responsibilities, personnel, organizational structure, overall scale, and annual production of vaccines and germs of Unit 731. In addition, it contained sketches of Pingfang, where Unit 731 was located, and the blueprints of germ bombs. From his interviewees, Murray Sanders obtained the top secrets of Unit 731.
Intensive efforts were expended to develop BW into a practical weapon, at least 8 types of special bombs being tested for large-scale dissemination of bacteria. The most thoroughly investigated munition was the UJI Type 50 bomb. More than 2,000 of these bombs were used in field trials. Employing static explosion techniques and drop tests from planes, approximately 4,000 bombs were used in field trials at Pingfang.
The report contained elaborate experimental data, bomb types, and information on outdoor human experimentation. Based on this information, the U.S. Army began to launch a comprehensive investigation into Unit 731's biological warfare, human experimentation, and germ weapons, kickstarting the U.S. Army's secret investigation of Japan's biological war. Thompson's investigation. Once Sanders returned to the the U.S. military dispatched Lieutenant Colonel A.T. Thompson to further the investigation of Unit 731 in Japan. Thompson, a veterinarian from Dietrich Base, excelled in studying biological warfare. He interviewed and investigated Shiro Ishii, Masaji Kitano, and other Unit 731 and Unit 100 members, and wrote a report, but he committed suicide in 1948. On February 5, 1946, Thompson started his interview of Shiro Ishii at Ishii's home, in a generally friendly atmosphere. Below are the excerpts of the interview.
Question. Q. You did on BW work expect at the Army Medical College and at Haibo? Answer. A. BW work was done only at Haibo. Only general preventive medical science was conducted at the Army Medical College. Q. Was any work done at the Kyoto Imperial University? A. The professor there did not like that kind of work, so none was undertaken. Q. The research work was limited to Harbin Institute? A. Only at Haibo. A lot of men in my unit and others who do not know anything about it have been spreading rumors to the effect that some secret work has been carried on in BW was planned by my unit, and that a lot of bacteria were being produced, large quantities of bombs manufactured, and airplanes being gathered for that purpose. I want to have a clear understanding that this is false. Q. In other words, no work was conducted on BW except at the Harbin Institute. A. That is correct. Q. Did you expect the enemy to use BW? A. In my opinion, some countries might. Q. Which countries did you expect to use it? A. Soviet Union and China. They had used it previously, and I expected them to use it again. Q. What did you expect from the United States in the field of BW? A. I did not think the United States would use BW. Q. Why? A. I believed since the United States had money and materials, they would use more scientific methods of warfare. Q. Do you think BW is practical? A. You have to have much money and materials to create conditions favorable to BW. Q. Do you think BW is something that nations will have to contend with in the future? A. In a winning war, there is no necessity for using BW, and in a losing war, there is not the opportunity to use BW effectively. You need a lot of men, money, and materials to conduct research into BW. There is little data on the effectiveness of BW as a weapon. I do not know whether BW can be used effectively on a large scale. It might be effective on a small scale. Q. Do you mean sabotage? A. It might be effective in such methods of sabotage as dropping bacteria into wells. Q. It might be effective under those conditions. A. I believe such methods could be controlled by my methods of water purification. I heard over the radio that Russia had completed its preparations for BW, and it frightened me. But I did not know whether it was actual fact or just was printed in Red Star or some other newspaper as a scare. I do not know how far they have advanced in BW and have wondered what they would use if they attacked with BW. Q. What bacteria do you know the Russians might use? A. Tularemia, typhus fever, cholera, anthrax, pest. Q. What makes you believe that the Russians would use those organisms? A. I heard reports from people returned from Russia that the Russians had been using these organisms in their preparation for BW. Q. Would it not be difficult to produce typhus organisms on large scale? A. If you could produce a lot of lice, you might be able to produce a lot of typhus. German and Polish vaccine is prepared from lice. Trouble with lice is that you have to have human infectious blood to infect the lice. Weil's disease is produced in the same manner, and it is very hard to get large quantities. If a country was rich enough, it might be able to make that disease a dangerous weapon. Q. Was any research conducted on BW against food plants? A. We did not do any experiments on it. Our work was to protect the soldiers. Q. Did anyone else concern themselves with BW against crop plants? A. I do not know. Q. Were you concerned with BW agents against animals? A. We did not do any experiments on large animals. We used small animals as test animals. Besides, we had no veterinarians. Q. Did veterinary laboratories do any research on BW? A. I do not know. It was such a secret that there was no communication between units. Even personnel working on experiments in my unit did not know what they were working on. Only myself, Colonel Masuda, and one or two other persons know. Q. Who were the other persons? A. There were some who suspected what was going on but did not know. Colonel Masuda, Tomosada, and myself know. Q. What section of the BW Institute did the BW work? A. When those experiments came up, a number of men from each group were picked out to do the work. They were only together temporarily and were disbanded when the experiments were completed. Q. Were all the people in such groups informed of the nature of the work? A. They were not informed of what they were doing. They protested that they could not carry on with their own experiments and that their regular work was being interfered with. Q. Would not more progress have been made if those working on the experiment had been told what it was all about? A. If they had known what they were working on, they would have shrunk up from fright and asked for more pay. They were not well-trained men and were usually picked from the ranks. Q. A soldier is a soldier, and could you not have ordered them to do the work? A. They were not soldiers. They were reservists. Those in the branch units were soldiers, but not those in the main unit. I could not order them. Q. How much research cooperation was given by the Navy on BW? A. There was no cooperation whatsoever.
By this point, the Tokyo trials had already begun. Cooperating with the U.S. military or not, and how to cooperate with them, touched on fate of Shiro Ishii and members of Unit 731. Shiro Ishii could have been brought to trial at any moment. Therefore, interviews conducted by the U.S. military at that critical moment certainly cast a heavy shadow over him. He dared neither to deny the facts completely, nor to admit them all, because he wanted immunity from the trails of war criminals and grappled through the difficulties while, at the same time, he intended to cover up his criminal facts and be immune from the prosecution. Facing this dilemma, Shiro needed to be cunning in his dealings with the U.S. interviewers. During one interview, he submitted a table of research facilities and members related to biological warfare, and a table of the work of the Harbin Research Lab. He acknowledged that he had conducted research in general preventative medicine and outdoor experimentation, but denied any involvement in planning and carrying out biological warfare. In Thompson's first interview, Shiro Ishii denied involvement in biological warfare, research into germ weapons, human experimentation, and cooperation with the Navy and other units in his research and personnel training. He confessed only to research into bacteriology and preventative medicine. This was in stark contrast to his previous championing of the status and value of biological warfare. He hoped to dupe the U.S. Army into overlooking the facts about biological warfare and draw its focus instead towards bacteriology and preventative research. His references to the sensitive topic of the Soviet Union's preparations for biological war were a further attempt to cloud the issue. It is clear from Thompson's records that the U.S. Army did not get the kind of information it wanted from the first interview. Shiro Ishii survived the first interview through cunning and sophistry, but Thompson later saw through his duplicity. He wrote in his report,
1. The information about Japanese biological weapons and activities from independent channels coincided with these ideas. According to the information gleaned from the interview, the information provider seemed to have gotten instructions in terms of the number of germ weapons and the critical issues. 2. Shiro Ishii claimed that all information came from his memory because it has been said that all records had been destroyed in line with the instructions of the Japanese army. However, some information, in particular the diagrams of bombs, was so detailed that one had to doubt about the record destruction. 3. From the entire interview, it was obvious that the Japanese concealed its activities of biological weapons and attempted to minimize the activities, especially efforts concerning the research and development of attacking weapons.
Thompson's three judgments were quite correct. He had already seen how Shiro Ishii and others would collude in secret to deal with the U.S. investigation and how they reached consensus before offering information. Thompson questioned the authenticity of the claim that the documents had been destroyed by Unit 731 and confirmed that Shiro Ishii was withholding the truth about researching and producing biological weapons. Based on these judgments, Thompson refused to settle for the information he had been given. He pressed hard to further investigate Masaji Kitano, who had just returned from China. The two subjects of Thompson's interview, Shiro Ishii and Masaji Kitano, were both heads of Unit 731, and as Army surgeons, they bore the rank of Lieutenant General. These were the two who directly planned, organized, and carried out the inhumane, inhuman, and unethical war crimes. Thompson's investigation was directed at the correct targets, pointed out the correct direction of the investigation, and had been unfolded around the core members of Unit 731, and it offered the U.S. military a shortcut that made it possible to reach its expected objectives more easily. Although Unit 731 was demolished, an organization equivalent to its post-war headquarters was established in Kanazawa University and Noma Shrine, and Shiro Ishii's orders were still decisive to the remaining members of Unit 731. That's why he could contact any of them to collude in false confession at any time and order them to search information sought after by the U.S. Army. By that time, Ishii was not quite clear about the original intentions of the U.S. military in its investigation of biological warfare, and worried that the investigation might be sworn evidence of Tokyo trials. Of course, the U.S. military would not buy his words easily and rest upon this, which was proved by the information gained later. From February 5th to March 11th, Thompson interviewed Shiro Ishii and others on multiple occasions and wrote a 48-page report numbered 765017, the so-called Report on Japanese Biological Warfare, in which Shiro Ishii gave a full account of his Army career, his educational background, and his investigations into biological warfare overseas, as well as the systems, resources, tasks, and responsibilities of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. Shiro handed Thompson the outline of work conducted by the Ping-Fong Institute, namely, the research plan of the Ping-Fong headquarters of Unit 731, which covered research into preventive medicine, diagnostics, therapeutics, field disinfection, drugs and chemicals, substitutes for clothes and food, field supply of purified water, transportation, preventive medicine applicable to defense against bombs and aerial spraying, vaccines, curative sera, diagnostic antigens, diagnostic sera, materials for filtering apparatus, drugs, repair of water filtering apparatus, tentative manufacture of bombs. Thompson's report indicates that Shiro Ishii provided valuable information during his interview, and the U.S. Army got hold of information about Unit 731's personnel arrangements, organizational structure, research scope, scale, and progress, as well as biological warfare and human experimentation. From the subsequent interviews with Shiro Ishii, Thompson got even more information than from the initial one. Although the confidential process cannot now be known, The huge change in Shiro Ishii's behavior within such short period of time, from avoiding any talk of biological warfare and human experimentation to active cooperation with the Thompson investigation, might be attributed not only to the pressure imposed by U.S. Army, but also to this author's assumption that the informants had been instructed as to the amount and nature of information that was to be divulged under interrogation. Thompson also analyzed the information provided by Shiro Ishii. He already knew that Unit 731 members were colluding behind the scenes, and that relevant documents had not been completely destroyed, but hidden somewhere. Shiro's confession narrowed the scope of the biological warfare and covered the fact of the research in attacking biological weapons. Thompson wrote in his report,
1. Failure to fully utilize Japanese scientific capability by restriction of BW research and development to the military with lack of cooperation between the military services precluded progress toward development of BW into a practical weapon. 2. Had a practical BW weapon been achieved, it is unlikely that Japan would have resorted to its use because of fear retaliation by means of chemical warfare. Insofar as could be learned, Japan had no information of American activity in BW.
based on the known historical facts, Unit 731 received the support of the Kwantung Army and the Imperial Army General Staff Office in its research and production of germ weapons, and the cooperation of Unit 100 and Unit 516 of the Kwantung Army and the Tokyo Army Medical School in its study of germ weapons and chemical weapons. It also obtained assistance from Tokyo Imperial University, Kyoto Imperial University, and other Japanese medical colleges. This means that it worked together not only with the military departments, but also with academia. But the Thompson report showed that he failed to get a full picture of the real situation with regard to Japan's research into biological weapons. Thompson also appears to implicitly acknowledge the existence of U.S. research into biological weapons. Thompson's conclusion about biological weapons left this author confused in that the U.S. was fully aware of Unit 731's work on biological warfare, and yet Thompson seemed to doubt it. In fact, the U.S. intelligence agencies had long confirmed that Japan had carried out biological war in China. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Health had offered the U.S. information pertaining to Japan's biological warfare in Zhejiang in 1940, including the Report on the Origin of Plague in Northern Zhejiang in 1940, and the Japanese Army's attempt to carry out biological warfare in China. The U.S. Embassy in China had also looked for related information on the Chinese front, including on the plague in the winter of 1941, excerpts of Dr. Lim's letter from Chongqing about the plague, the #1 epidemiology report submitted to the U.S. authority, asking for medical assistance to China, and Ray Chesley's report on Japanese war in China at the end of 1941 and 1942. This means that the U.S. intelligence agencies did not share their information about the real status of Japanese biological war with Thompson from the Dietrich base. Fell's investigation. On April 5, 1947, Norbert Fell from the U.S. Department of Defense was sent to Tokyo to further investigate Japanese biological warfare. Norbert Fell graduated from the University of Chicago and centered his research in microbiology and limnology. He was director of the botany lab of Dietrich Base. He interviewed Shiro Ishii, Masuda Tomasada, Garudo Junichi, Ryoichi Naito, and Wakamatsu Yujiro. On May 15, 1947, the Department of Defense sent a telegram to Fell and determined the contents of his interview.
Part 1. The questions following were prepared by Dr. Norman for use by Dr. Fell during interrogation. Part 2. What were the main core considered by the Japanese group concerned with crop destruction? Part 3. What plant diseases, organisms, or insects were studied? Part 4. Was the intent to attack by sabotage or by direct application of the agent to the crop by airplane? Part 5. Where was the laboratory work carried out? Part 6. Who were the chief technical people involved and what position had they held previously? Part 7. Were field trials carried out? On a small plot basis or on a large scale? Were any of these in isolated areas or on islands? Part 8. How was it proposed to distribute the agents for crops? By dropping test tube cultures or use of bombs or sprays from airplanes? If either of the latter, what kind of equipment was developed? Part 9. Was attention given to defensive measures, such as spraying of crops that had previously been treated? Part 10. Were any experiments carried out on effects on crops of chemicals such as oil, war gases, or poisons, or weed killers? Part 11. Were experiments carried out on burning of crops or vegetation by incendiaries and/or spraying or treating? Part 12. Were there any gardens or field plots at or near the BW installation? How big were they? Were they isolated from other farms? What crops were growing? Part 13. Did you see men working in the plots, spraying or dusting the plants? Did any of the crops die or change color? Did airplanes fly over them at low altitude? Part 14. Do you know if the grain or vegetables from these plots were fed to animals or men? Part 15. Were there any agronomists, plant pathologists, botanists, crop breeders, or entomologists on the technical staff of the BW installation? What sort of work were they doing? Part 16. Were chemical weed killers in use in Japan before the war? If so, what substances were used? Were they available during the war? Part 17. What crop diseases do you know of or can recognize? Do any of these cause serious losses in the vicinity of the BW installation?
From the contents prepared by the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. military authorities began to pay particular attention to the information concerning plant germ warfare, the relationship between plant germ warfare and agronomists, entomologists, and biologists, and the implications of, defenses against, and responses to plant germ warfare for human beings and animals. From another perspective, this suggests that the U.S. now regarded plant germ warfare as the major topic of its investigation, and that U.S. initial attention had turned to human experimentation and germ experimentation, winning preliminary expected results with the deepening investigation. Fell completed his report on June 20th, 1947. It was titled, Brief Summary of New Information About Japanese BW Activities, and included reports on germ warfare, research into crop diseases, written by 19 people, as well as papers on the entire biological warfare project, written by Shiro Ishii. In addition, Fell received 8,000 pathological sections, over 700 pages of printed materials, and data about human experimentation on anthrax, plague, paratyphoid A and B, dysentery, cholera, glanders, and typhoid, sent by Unit 731. The Hill and Victor Investigation. In October 1947, the Dietrich base dispatched Joseph Victor and Edwin Hill to investigate Japanese biological warfare. Hill, director of the Basic Division of Dietrich Base, was a microbiologist. Victor was a U.S. pathologist. They interviewed Shiro Ishii, Masaji Kitano, Masuda Tomosada, and Oda Kuria from October 29th to November 25th and wrote the final report on the investigation of biological warfare. The 77-page report elaborated on the objectives, methods, and outcomes of the investigation and was submitted to the U.S. Department of Defense by Hill in December 1947. The objective of Hill's investigation was to complement the investigation of Sanders, Thompson, and Fell and prove the accuracy and completeness of the various reports submitted by Unit 731. In the conclusion, Hill wrote,
Evidence gathered in this investigation has greatly supplemented and amplified previous aspects of this field. It represents data which have been obtained by Japanese scientists at the expenditure of many millions of dollars and years of work. Information has accrued with respect to human susceptibility to these diseases, as indicated by specific infectious doses of bacteria. Such information could not be obtained in our own laboratories because of scruples attached to human experimentation. These data were secured with a total outlay of 250,000 yen to date, a mere pittance by comparison with the actual cost of the studies.
From Hill's report, it can be determined that the U.S. paid 250,000 yen to get hold of Japan's data on biological warfare. This is an important document, serving as evidence of the deal between Japan and the U.S. After Hill's investigation, the investigation was approaching its end. Conclusion of the secret deal between Japan and the U.S. On February 7, 1947, Soviet procurators asked the International Military Tribunal of the Far East to interview Shiro Ishii, Ota Kuria, and Kikuchi. MacArthur sent a telegram to the Joint Staff in Washington.
Request based on information alleged to have been obtained from unidentified prisoners of war who stated that experiments authorized and conducted by above 3 Japanese resulted in deaths of 2,000 Chinese and Manchurians. Russians present request on their assumption that supplementary war crimes trials will be authorized by United States, but also admit interest in mass production of typhus and cholera bacteria and typhus-bearing fleas at Pingfang, said to have been described by prisoners of war to them. Opinion here that Russians not likely to obtain information from Japanese not already known to United States, and that United States might get some additional information from Russian line of questioning in monitored interrogations.
On March 21st, Washington Joint Staff replied to MacArthur.
Subject to following conditions, permission granted for SCAP-controlled Soviet interrogation of General Ishii, Colonels Kikuchi and Ota. Topic: Biological warfare. Prior to interview by Soviets, the Japanese biological warfare experts should be instructed to make no mention of U.S. interview on this subject.
Accordingly, in terms of facilitating interviews with individuals involved in Japanese biological warfare, the U.S. agreed to the requests of the Soviet Union. But to have exclusive control over documents relating to Japanese biological warfare, the U.S. reached an agreement with Shiro Ishii beforehand that their own interviews must not be revealed. In addition, any significant information about biological warfare must not be exposed to the Soviet Union. On May 6th, the Far East Command sent an urgent military telegram to the U.S. Department of Defense. The number 52,423 telegram was divided into 5 parts.
Part 1. Statements obtained from Japanese here confirm statements of USSR prisoners Kawashima and Karasawa contained in copies of interrogation given U.S. by USSR. Part 2. Experiments on humans were known to and described by 3 Japanese and confirmed tacitly by Ishii. Field trials against Chinese Army took place on at least 3 occasions. Scope of program indicated by report of reliable informant Matsuda that 400 kilograms of dried anthrax organisms destroyed at Pingfang in August 1945, and research on use of BW against plant life was carried out. Reluctant statements by Ishii indicate he had superiors, possibly general staff, who knew and authorized the program. Ishii states that if guaranteed immunity from war crimes in documentary form for himself, superiors, and subordinates, he can describe program in detail. Ishii claims to have extensive theoretical high-level knowledge, including strategic and tactical use of BW on defense and offense, backed by some research on best BW agents to employ by geographical areas of Far East, the use of BW in cold climates. Part 3. A statements so far have been obtained by persuasion, exploitation of Japanese fear of USSR, and desire to cooperate with US. Large part of data, including most of the valuable technical BW information as to results of human experiments and research into BW for crop destruction, probably can be obtained in this manner from low-echelon Japanese personnel not believed liable to war crimes trials. B. Additional data, possibly including some statements from Ishii, probably can be obtained by informing Japanese involved that information will be retained in intelligence channels and will not be employed as war crimes evidence. Complete story, to include plans and theories of Ishii and superiors, probably can be obtained by documentary immunity to Ishii and associates. Ishii also can assist in securing complete cooperation of his former subordinates. Part 4. None of above influences joint interrogations to be held shortly with USSR under provisions of your Radio W984446. Part 5. Adoption of method in Part 3B above recommended by Kinkfi. Request reply soon.
After the telegram, one memorandum noted the joint interrogation of Shiro Ishii by both the U.S. and the Soviet militaries, and that the Soviet Union transferred the documents to the U.S. while showing great interest in human experimentation, outdoor experimentation, crop biological war, strategies of biological warfare, and tactics. U.S. intelligence also commented,
Data in detail on above topics are of great intelligence value to U.S. Dr. Fell, War Department representative, states that this new evidence was not known by U.S.
It can be deduced that Shiro Ishii didn't follow the instructions of the U.S. to the letter. Instead, he volunteered some information unknown even to the Americans to highlight the uniqueness and importance of the materials about biological warfare and increase his chances of obtaining immunity.
Complete story, to include plans and theories of Ishii and superiors, probably can be obtained by documentary immunity to Ishii and associates. Ishii also can assist in securing complete cooperation of his former subordinates.
By comparison, the materials gained previously were from those war criminals willing to cooperate with the U.S. and trying to escape trials. But Shiro Ishii and others from Unit 731 still controlled multitudes of documents about biological warfare that the U.S. Army hoped to get hold of. To that end, the U.S. Army repeatedly told Unit 731 members, either explicitly or implicitly, that the information obtained from interviews would not be used as evidence of crimes. From another perspective, the interviewers mostly were technicians from the Dietrich base, who focused their attention from the outset on information about Japanese biological warfare, including biological weapons, tactics, and the effects of experimentation, rather than collecting evidence of war crimes. The U.S. troops stationed in Japan recognized that exempting Shiro Ishii and others did produce sound results, namely, the expected full cooperation. The Department of Defense did not respond to this request until March 13, 1948. The Department of Defense sent a telegram to the legal section of Far East Command on June 3rd.
It is imperative that you inform this office by cable soonest detailed info on all possible war crimes evidence or charges against Ishii or any member of groups referred to in above extract for consideration in conference here concerning this matter. Specifically, what evidence of war crimes is now in possession of U.S. authority against Ishii or any member of groups for whom he has requested guarantee of immunity? Which of our allies filed war crimes charges against Ishii and or any or all of these groups? Is Ishii or any members of groups included among major Japanese war criminals awaiting trial?
The legal section of Far East Command replied to the U.S. Department of Defense on June 6th.
1. The reports and files of the legal section on Ishii and his co-workers are based on anonymous letters, hearsay affidavits, and rumors. The legal section interrogations to date of the numerous persons concerned with the BW project in China do not reveal sufficient evidence to support war crime charges. The alleged victims are of unknown identity. Unconfirmed allegations are to the effect that criminals, farmers, women, and children were used for BW experimental purposes. The Japanese Communist Party alleges that the Ishi BWA, Bacterial War Army, conducted experiments on captured Americans in Mukden, and that simultaneously research on similar lines was conducted in Tokyo and Kyoto. 2. None of Ishii's subordinates are charged or held as war crime suspects, nor is there sufficient evidence on file against them. Ishii's possible superiors, who are now on trial before IMTFE, include Umezu, Commander, Kwantung Army, 1939 to 1944, Minami, Commander, Kwantung Army, 1934 to 1936, Koiso, Chief of Staff, Kwantung Army, 1932 to 1934, Tojo, Chief of Staff, Kwantung Army, 1937 to 1938. 3. None of our allies to date has filed war crimes charges against Ishii or any of his associates. Neither Ishii nor his associates are included among major Japanese war criminals awaiting trial.
On June 22, 1947, the U.S. Department of Defense offered more information through telegram to the legal section of Far East Command.
We are satisfied. Evidence now in possession. Legal sect SCAP does not warrant such charge against and trial of Ishii and his group. Must have info on all possible proof regarding Ishii BW war crimes under rules of land warfare before reaching decision.
The U.S. knew perfectly well that Shiro Ishii and Unit 731 had committed war crimes, yet requested further confirmation of information about why neither he nor its members were to be charged or judged and incorporated into the list of major war criminals. At this point, although the U.S. had not granted nominal immunity in order to avoid publication of the materials in its possession, the reality was that it had already set aside the responsibilities of Unit 731. Therefore, the U.S. intended to give official agreement to the telegram on May 6th, with plenty of doubts. On June 27, 1947, the legal section sent an urgent telegram to the Department of Defense, providing reports on the evidence collected by the investigation into Unit 731, and concluded that
Japanese BW group headed by Ishii did violate rules of land warfare, but this expression of opinion is not a recommendation that group be charged and tried for such.
On March 13, 1948, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff instructed MacArthur to reply to the request made in No. 52423 telegram on May 6, 1947. That reply came 10 months later, rather than what MacArthur required, as soon as possible, demonstrating the cautious and careful consideration applied by the highest echelons of the U.S. Army. Below are the contents of the reply.
Reports by technical experts who have returned from your theater indicate that to date necessary information and scientific data have been obtained to your satisfaction. Suggest your recommendation on Parts 3, B, and 5 be resubmitted for further consideration if and when considered necessary.
The telegram sent by the Joint Chiefs of Staff indicated that the U.S. already had all the information and scientific data it desired about Japanese biological war, and that the 4-year goal of the secret investigation had been achieved. 3B and Part 5 of the telegram make this specific. That was the order of the U.S. decision-makers to MacArthur. It could be viewed as a consent of the U.S. to acquire the materials, including reports from Shiro Ishii, by informing the Japanese the following information, namely, reserve the materials through the intelligence channel rather than use them as evidence of war crimes. The contents were quite technical, the equivalent of accepting the condition of exempting Shiro Ishii and all members of Unit 731 from war crime charges, so as to obtain objective of getting all experimentation documents of Unit 731. Shiro, on one occasion, had asked for immunity in writing, but the U.S. considered that would have a huge impact on U.S. diplomacy and the U.S. government, and took the way of technical expression in the order given to MacArthur. As a result, the U.S. got the experimentation data it desired, and Unit 731 members, including Shiro Ishii, were placed beyond the reach of the law. Thus, this telegram could be considered as the final document confirming the secret deal between the U.S. and Shiro Ishii. Conclusion. Shiro Ishii and others confessed to the U.S. military the organizational structure, responsibilities, tasks, human experimentation, biological warfare, research and experiments on biological weapons, strategies and tactics of biological warfare of Unit 731 to escape trials for their war crimes. More than 60 years later, the relevant files were declassified, bringing to light historical facts about Unit 731, which had previously been unknown to the public. In addition to providing an essential complement to research into the history of Japanese biological warfare and having a major academic and research value, they serve in refuting Japanese claims that it had never invaded China. Shiro shifted from circumvention to cooperation, then from partial to full cooperation with the U.S., reflecting the complexity of his mental processes in those early post-war days. On the one hand, he hoped to evade his wartime responsibilities and escape trial as a war criminal. On the other, he feared that any information he provided to achieve this goal might provide evidence for a trial. As to his real attitude, the judgment of the U.S. interviewers was sometimes correct and at other times erroneous. This can be clearly seen in Thompson's report. Shiro's confessions about Unit 731's system, resources, tasks, responsibilities, about the research and production of germ munitions by the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, about the activities of the branch departments in various war zones, about the divisions of epidemic prevention and water purification, and about the study of defensive war, all add to the body of existing academic knowledge of the subject. The information he revealed about the Biological Weapons Lab and Gas Weapons Lab clarify our understanding of Unit 731's nature. The outline of work. Conducted by the Ping-Fang Institute, provided by Shiro Ishii, enables us to review the research areas and scope of Unit 731 and the progress it made, covering preventative medicine, diagnosis, vaccines, serology, medicine, and bacteriology. The information on the scope and coverage of Unit 731 goes far beyond anything that has been revealed in previously available information. The secret deal between the U.S. military and Unit 731 varnished over Unit 731's immoral, uncivilized, and criminal activities in human experimentation and biological warfare. As Sheldon H. Harris wrote in Factories of Death, the U.S. State Department took the attitude that, as long as there were no written records that might risk embarrassing the U.S. by exposing the immunity granted to these war criminals, the deal with Shiro Ishii could proceed. The U.S. concealed the facts and the criminal responsibilities of the Japanese war criminals, enabling Unit 731 members, led by Shiro Ishii, to evade all charges. This undermined the justice and authority of the Tokyo trials, and denied all justice to the Chinese who suffered under the Japanese invasion, and in particular to those Chinese, Soviets, and North Koreans who were the victims of human experimentation, and to their families. While the U.S. sought to keep the materials to itself, the Soviet Union was also attempting to acquire the information. The Soviet Union secretly interrogated Kiyoshi Kawashima and Karasawa Tomio in 1946. The issue of Japanese biological war became a field of contest between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, surrounding the Court of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. Ultimately, the U.S. established domination over the Tokyo trials and was able to cover up the facts of the biological war, reaching its goal at the cost of sacrificing and sabotaging the interests of China and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's attempts to extradite and prosecute Japanese war criminals were rejected by the U.S. Even investigation and collection of evidence were ruled out. The Soviet Union totally lost out to the U.S. in the contest. But these events have had an impact that lasted long after the end of the Tokyo trials, even till today. The Soviet Union tried 12 Japanese for crimes relating to biological warfare in Khabarovsk and compiled the contents of these trials into a book, Materials on the Trial of Former Servicemen of the Japanese Army Charged with Manufacturing and Employing Bacteriological Weapons, which was translated into Chinese, English, German, Japanese, and Korean. Reviewing the Khabarovsk trial initiated by Soviet Union, it can be said it was inextricably related to the secret deal between the U.S. and Japan. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Preservation of the Site of Unit 731. By August 1945, when Japan declared its unconditional surrender, the zone that Unit 731 had created in Harbin extended to an area of 6.1 square kilometers. Shortly before its withdrawal, Unit 731 blew up much of the facility in order to wipe out evidence of the crimes it had committed there. It was left in a condition similar to what we find today. Over time, the site has been subjected to urban development, social vicissitudes, dismantlement and erosion, commercial occupation and public utilization. But now, as a result of government protection and efficient management, the number of remaining buildings stands at about 80, of which 23 are on the state-level protection list for cultural relics. The history of preservation. After the withdrawal of Unit 731, the site lacked timely and efficient protection due to domestic disorder, and disease prevention was not immediately enforced in the vicinity. Joint conservation by the central government and governments at local levels only began after the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1950. On March 11, 1950, the Health Department of the People's Government of Northeast China issued the note titled, "To collect evidence of biological warfare by Japanese war criminals," stipulating that as there were large bacteria factories in Pingfang of Harbin and in Jujiayao of Anda, the remains of these factories were to be quarantined and protected from destruction or renovation under the charge of local governments in order to enable the collection of future evidence. This file serves as the earliest record of the investigation and protection of the site of Unit 731. Produced from April to May 1956, a film lasting 9 minutes and 10 seconds, shot by Wang Jikun, a member of the Harbin Local History Institute, is the earliest available documentary about the site. The video recorded everything about the site after it was blown up, including debris of the boiler room, broken walls of the square building, scattered biological debris on the ground, the enclosing wall of the Insect Experiment Department, and the Human Anatomy Laboratory. From 1957 to 1981, and especially in the period of the Great Leap Forward, as a result of the prevailing conditions throughout the country, many facilities on the site were dismantled to provide bricks for house building and iron and steel for reuse, such as the steel and iron support frame of the boiler room. During the Cultural Revolution, further anarchy prevailed, and the local Revolutionary Committee mobilized 3,000 militia and middle school students to dig as deep as 2 meters into the ground, raise the broken walls to the ground, and completely destroy many underground facilities. Since the 1980s, Japan has continually tampered with the content of its history textbooks to enable information about its invasion of China to be confused, distorted, and even denied altogether. Japanese militarism has begun to rise again from the ashes. In response, China began to direct more attention to the protection and utilization of the site of Unit 731. In August 1982, a survey group from the Harbin Local History Office surveyed the site and searched for survivors from the forced labor of Unit 731. On September 17, 1982, Japanese author Morimura Seiichi visited the site and met in Beijing with Xia Yan, then Minister of Culture, raising some suggestions in relation to the preservation of the site of Unit 731, which were appreciated by the Chinese government. On December 25, 1982, the Harbin municipal government released the Announcement on the Protection of the Ruins of the Crime of Unit 731 of the Kwantung Army, followed by the establishment of the control station of the Pingfang District Cultural Relics that was commissioned to take charge of cleaning, exploring, digging up, protecting, and administering the site. This was the first time that the local government had been assigned to protect the site in a normalized way. On March 7, 1983, the Heilongjiang provincial government placed the site of Unit 731 in the list of cultural relics under provincial-level protection. On August 15, 1985, an exhibition hall displaying evidence of crimes committed by Unit 731 was opened to the public. Significant progress was witnessed in the protection of the site from 1991 to 1993, and 22 sections of the site were explicitly included in the scope under protection. On August 15, 1995, a new exhibition hall was officially opened, which was 300 meters to the east of the headquarters building of Unit 731. From 1999 to 2001, 143 households and 12 public bodies and local businesses were moved out, and part of the site was cleaned, explored, and renovated. 11 independent individual venues, totaling 10.4 hectares in area, have been opened to the public. In 2006, the site of Unit 731 was approved by the State Council to be included in the 6th batch of cultural relics under state-level protection as a major historical site of modern history. From 2008 to 2012, the Harbin municipal government implemented a shantytown renovation project that involved relocating 288 households in the core area of the site. The Heilongjiang Archaeology Research Institute compiled the Report of Investigation and Survey on the site of Unit 731, and the Shanxi Engineering and Technology Research Center for the Protection of Ancient Relics compiled the protection plan for the site of Unit 731. In September 2012, the State Administration of Cultural Heritage put the ruins of Unit 731 on the candidate list for China's World Cultural Heritage. Current status. There are 4 types of buildings on the site of Unit 731. The first are buildings relatively better preserved. Such buildings are made of steel-reinforced concrete and more solid in structure, and had been in use and under protection after the war. These include the headquarters building, the South Gate sentry post, the officers' dormitory, the insect cultivation room, the bee bomb assembly and storage rooms, the underground ground squirrel breeding room, the underground cistern, the gas lab, and the gas storage room. The second group are those badly damaged, but with their external forms remaining still discernible, and their former functions can be ascertained observation of their remains with help of available records. Their integral structure has witnessed little change despite renovation over the years. Such structures include the water supply tower, the crematorium, and the frostbite lab. The third are structures that have been badly damaged, with only part or ruins of them being left, yet their former functions can be ascertained in early data and records. Such structures include the boiler room of the power department and the building of the weaponry department. and the fourth were structures that have disappeared altogether. These include the virus laboratory, the barracks, the Japanese consular quarters, the auditorium, bar and leisure areas, the Togo Shrine, the airport, and the Beiyin River Experimental Zone. The original layout of the site involved 5 categories of buildings: the headquarters infrastructure, the facilities for bacterial and poisonous gas experimentation, the facilities for bacterial weapon research and production, the test animal breeding area, and the dormitory. The headquarters infrastructure. The remaining headquarters infrastructure of the site of Unit 731 consists of the headquarters building, the material supply department and arsenal, the Southgate sentry post, the boiler room, the railway track, the water supply tower, and the aviation department. The headquarters building was at the time known as Building Number 1. It was home to office staff and senior officers. Building Number 2 housed the material supply department and the arsenal. The material supply department was responsible for providing Unit 731 with all necessary experimental apparatus and medical equipment. The building was damaged in the 1970s when part of the roof was raised and a section of the building was dismantled. The arsenal was a depot where bayonets, arms, and ammunition were stored. The Southgate sentry post, the only of the 5 sentry posts that have survived, was the place where anyone entering the headquarters building was scrutinized by the guards. A wall and 2 chimneys have survived of the boiler room, which provided heat and electricity. Ancillary facilities of the boiler room include an underground backwash tank, 2 broken walls, and 39 heat emission holes. The railway track, built in 1935, was connected to Pingfang Railway Station and provided for the transport of experimental apparatus, test animals, and daily necessities. The water supply tower supplied drinking water to Unit 731. The aviation department, built in 1938 for field experimentation on bacterial warfare, carried out several field experiments on human beings in both the Anda Special Experimental Zone and the Chengzigu Field Experimental Zone, along with the Biological Experiment Department. These 7 structures preserved intact were part of a well-equipped headquarters infrastructure. As a complex system of integrating weaponry, experimental apparatus, fuel supply, and field experimentation, the comprehensive facilities enabled efficiency and a clear division of labor. Railway, highway, and aviation facilities supported the experimental work, and logistics infrastructure, including administration, heat, electricity, water, transport, and telecommunications, made Unit 731 the launch pad through which the Japanese aggressor troops were able to plan, organize, and implement bacterial warfare in China. Biological and poison gas experimental facilities. Facilities preserved at the site of Unit 731 for biological and poison gas experimentation include the square building, the special prison, the tubercle bacillus lab, the frostbite lab, the gas storage room, and the crematorium. The first department of Unit 731, i.e. the Biological Research Department, was mainly responsible for bacteria culture, experiment, and research. Subordinate sections were organized according to their research subjects, such as the plague section, the cholera section, and the typhoid fever section. There was also a special poison gas lab for experiment, research, and production. Unit 731 exploited human and animal subjects as the raw materials for its bacterial experiments. As these materials would ultimately be burned in the crematorium was a component of the facilities for biological and poison gas experiments. The square building, the core of Unit 731 for human experiments, consists of the buildings numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the bacteria laboratory, all of which were of 3 stories, 100 meters wide with a perimeter of 150 meters. Before it fled in defeat, Unit 731 blew up the building, turning it into debris, yet leaving behind some surface ruins. Thanks to ensuing protection and enclosure, man-made damage, and natural erosion, most of the surface ruins totally disappeared, leaving only the foundations. Separated by a north-south corridor, the building was divided into the east and west parts. Each part hosted a two-story special prison of similar architectural structure. The prison in the west part was called Building Number 7 for male Maruta, and that in the east part, Building Number 8 for female Maruta. There was a tubercle bacillus lab for the research, production, and experiments of the bacterium. The frostbite lab was for the production of dry bacteria and for human experiments, including research into therapeutic treatments of frostbites. In the gas lab, most of the Marutas, who were exploited for gas experiments, and had already been subjected to bacterial experiments. Chickens, dogs, mice, and pigeons were also used in gas experiments in order to compare death symptoms and timing with those of the Marutas. The attached gas storage room, with one ground story and two underground stories, was built along with the gas lab. This steel-concrete cylinder-like building with an arc cover was 5.3 meters high and 13 meters on its longest axis. 3 crematoria were built by Unit 731. The one located in the northwest corner of the square building, used for burning Marutas, was blown up by the unit before it fled. It has totally disappeared. The 2 that survived are in Baigong and Baywadi. These facilities made up the core of the biological and poison gas experiment work of Unit 731. They served as the special transport destination of Unit 731 and the military police of the Kwantung Army. Many anti-Japanese fighters from China, the Soviet Union, and Korea were killed here as Marutas. Previously, some scholars had called Unit 731 the Biological Unit 731, as they believed it was only involved in biological experiments and research on biological warfare. Later, it was found that this is not the case. As well as biological experiments, Unit 731 also conducted poison gas experiments on a large scale, for which the remains of the gas lab and the gas storage room serve as convincing evidence. The surviving biological and poison gas facilities provide important real evidence of the experiments it carried out on bacteria, of typhus, typhoid fever, cholera, plague, tuberculosis, and anthrax, and such evidence can tie up with, verify, and supplement other documentary and cultural evidence of the unit's crimes. Generally, environmental, sanitary, safety, and security considerations should be given in the construction of facilities for military use, and a crematoria, if necessary, should be separated from the core area. But Unit 731 built 3 crematoria within one special military zone. The presence of so many large crematoria in the key area of the headquarters provides conclusive evidence that Unit 731 frequently used experimental materials for biological and poison gas experiments, and subsequently destroyed those experimental materials in secret. Facilities for research into and the production of biological weapons. Facilities for biological weapons production and research preserved on the site of Unit 731 include the Biological Bomb Assembly Plant, the Weaponry Department, the Biological Shell Plant, and the Cheongsu Field Experimental Zone. The Biological Bomb Assembly Plant, also known as the Yamaguchi Department, as it was under the leadership of Chitaka Yamaguchi, was the site where biological bombs were assembled and stored. Answering to the Equipment Supply Department, it consisted of 5 two-story buildings, now with only one brick-concrete two-story building, with 2 extra underground storage rooms, still remaining now. The Weaponry Department was mainly for the research and manufacture of offensive weapons, such as biological bombs and shells, but it also carried out preventive research and the production of vaccines and serums. It was a quadrangle with a lab for horse serum research in the east, a high-temperature lab for small biological weapons manufacture, a sterilization room, and a research room in the south, and depots for motor vehicles and tanks in the west and north. It was destroyed by Unit 731 when they fled the site. The biological shell plant attached to Department No. 3 of Unit 731 consisted of a research center, a manufacturing complex, and a maintenance team. The research center was for research into the conditions of biological pollution and facilities for epidemic prevention and water purification. The manufacturing complex comprised a machinery plant, a manufacturing plant, a tool storage room, a designing room, a steel pipe plant, and a timber mill. The main task of Department No. 3 was to manufacture water filters, ceramic biological shells, and ceramic water filter pipes. The biological shell plant was located in Pingshin Town, also known as Yangmajiazi, of Harbin's Nangang district. 5 of the plant's buildings have survived, including the plant office, 2 kilns, and 2 chimneys. The Chengzigu Field Experimental Zone, the location where Unit 731 conducted field biological and poison gas experiments, was located 1.5 kilometers south of Pingle village of Pingshin Town. This was the site of Pingle City during the Liao, 907 to 1125, and Jin, 1115 to 1234, dynasties. Although Unit 731 carried out its secret activities under the guise of epidemic prevention and water purification, it cannot be denied that behind this facade, it was engaged in research into and production of biological weapons. Its facilities provided a complete system for research, manufacture, testing, storage, and transportation of biological weapons. Unit 731 also provided both indoor and field facilities for experiments on biological weapons. According to a survey of remaining fragments, ceramic biological bombs were the most numerous of the biological weapons produced by the unit. Together with the size of the biological shell plant, post-war analysis of numerous fragments of ceramic shells confirms the extent and the volume of biological weapons produced by the unit, and demonstrates quite clearly that Unit 731 was a special unit for research into and production of weapons for biological warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's report on Japanese biological warfare activities records Unit 731's research in biological weapons and presents in detail information about research and development, experiments, and production of biological bombs. According to the author, the biological bomb blueprints provided by Shiro Ishii indicate the research into and output of the Biological Production Department of Unit 731 and are the shared achievement of the Biological Shell Plant, the Biological Bombs Assembly Plant, and the Weaponry Department. Facilities for cultivating test animals. For long-term stability and sustainability of test animal supply, Unit 731 established fixed animal breeding facilities, including an animal breeding room, ground squirrel breeding room, an insect breeding room, and stalls for horses, oxen, and sheep. Unit 731 raised ground squirrels, white mice, rabbits, monkeys, horses, oxen, sheep, camels, and deer for biological and poison gas experiments, and also bred fleas, lice, bugs, flies, and mosquitoes for biological weapons production. Surviving breeding facilities are the animal breeding room, the ground squirrel breeding room, and the insect breeding room. The animal breeding room was mainly for feeding small test animals, such as white mice and rabbits. It was subordinated to the Ishii section of the Equipment Supply Department, headed by livestock engineer Mitsuo Ishii, the third brother in the family of Shiro Ishii. The ground squirrel breeding room was where the test ground squirrels were bred. Ground squirrels were the most numerous of the test animals bred by Unit 731. Therefore, Unit 731 was also nicknamed the Ground Squirrel Troop. The insect breeding room bred lice, bugs, flies, and mosquitoes, which were employed in many experiments as the carrier of infectious diseases. There were 3 buildings from south to north on the old site of the insect breeding room. A single-story U-shaped building stood in the south, and a single-story I-shaped building stood in the center. A 2-story shaped building was located in the north. Part of the enclosing wall has also survived. Unit 731 established many breeding facilities for test animals and procured a large number of mice from several sources. Based on the large size of these breeding facilities, the great number of purchased mice, and the wide range of varieties of test animals, we can conclude that, as the number of mice collected and bred by Unit went far beyond the requirements of routine research, Unit 731 collected and bred mice for the production of offensive plague bacteria weapons and plague vaccines. Unit 731 caught and collected mice to conduct large-scale experiments on plague and produced large quantities of plague bacillus and plague weapons, turning the Pingfang district into a powder keg. Subsequent outbreaks of plague wrought havoc on the local civilians. Dormitory area. The dormitory area of Unit 731, also known as the Togo Dormitory, the Togo Village, or the Officer Building, was a residential area for officers, medics, soldiers, and military families, and is now represented by 34 surviving buildings in the Pingfang district. The dormitory area consisted of residential buildings for military families, bachelor dormitories, officer dormitories, and facilities supplying water and heating. Initially, the unit lacked commercial and social facilities, like a school, post office, hospital, library, leisure area, restaurant brothel, and a Togo shrine. But very few Japanese military units could compete with Unit 731 in size, surface area, and dormitory facilities, indicating that Unit 731 was a special unit that was superior in size, budget, and staff. Later, Unit 731 provided the dormitory area with a library, hospital, leisure area, and post office to provide R&R facilities to and instill militarism in the executioners who worked there under the guise of medics, soldiers, and administrative staff. Camouflaging itself as an ordinary facility, it attempted to rationalize the brutal criminal activity and the human experiments that were carried out there. The protection and utilization of these sites falls under the General Protection Plan of the City of Harbin, as well as under the Protection Plan for Old Sites of Unit 731 in China, released by the Heilongjiang Provincial Government in 2014. An exhibition hall. The ruins of Unit 731, covering a total area of 248,000 square meters, have now been turned into a base for education in patriotism and national defense. In 1997, it was made a national education and demonstration base in patriotism. In 2005, one of the national top 100 classic scenic areas for red tourism. And in 2006, major national historical and cultural sites under national protection. In 2011, the city authorities of Harbin promulgated the rules of protection on the site of Unit 731 in Harbin, thus bringing the ruins under legal protection. In 2012, the ruins of Unit 731 were included in China's UNESCO World Heritage Tentative List, and the grassroots-level administrative unit is the Exhibition Hall of Crime Evidence of Japanese Army Unit 731. The exhibition hall opened to the public on August 15, 2015. The exhibition has 6 sectors: the bacteriological warfare launched by the Japanese Army, Unit 731, the supreme headquarters of Japan's bacteriological warfare, human experimentation, R&D of bacteriological weapons, launching bacteriological warfare, destroying evidence and trials. The Exhibition Hall of Crime. Evidence of Japanese Army Unit 731 opens to the public free of charge. It hosts large numbers of Chinese and foreign visitors every year. In 2013, for example, there were approximately 300,000 visitors, most of whom were Chinese. The largest number of foreign visitors, around 4,000, came from South Korea, followed by 2,000 visitors from Japan. As an educational platform for students of primary and middle schools, as well as the rest of society, the hall offers information about and education in Japan's aggression against China through a variety of channels, including interactive experiences with support from the government and civic organizations. It also holds large commemorative activities on special occasions and anniversaries, such as Qingming Festival, National Day, the anniversary of the victory of the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression, Memorial Days for Revolutionary Martyrs, and the National Memorial Day. Besides, it also promotes publicity by holding joint exhibitions. For instance, it has cooperated with Arak Independence Memorial Hall, the Jianchuan Museum in Chengdu, the September 18th Museum in Shenyang, and the Museum of the Imperial Palace of Manchukuo in holding joint exhibitions. Besides, it also supports overseas activities, such as the exhibition tour of crime evidence of Unit 731 in Japan, to expose the war crimes of Unit 731, publicizes carryover problems, and presents the protection and utilization of the site through the Internet, TV programs, and newspapers. Value assessment. For quite a long time, lack of a complete survey of the ruins of Unit 731 and systematic research into its protection and utilization has resulted in a number of problems that need to be urgently reviewed and addressed. On-site investigations and academic research further confirmed the historical and social value of the ruins, as well as the historical information it contains. Schemes and suggestions have been raised for the protection, development, and utilization of the site to extend the depth of associated research and to make the exhibition more scientific. The site has a vital role to play in educating future generations, in reminding them of the atrocities of the past, and in promoting the cause of peace. Social change, urban relocation, and renovation have resulted in profound alterations in the outer appearance of the site. For example, the virus lab and the barracks of the Kamo troops have disappeared, and some of the structures had been used as factory buildings for a long time, resulting in long-term neglect and absence of maintenance. On-scene investigation and comprehensive analysis of the ruins of Unit 731 have gained valuable data and information, such as the collection of a substantial volume of data and drawings showing the overall size, layout of, and historical functions of various structures of Unit 731, and add to the existing body of knowledge. New insights are listed in the following paragraphs. 1. The ruins contain substantial historical information and irrefutable evidence about the activities that were carried out there. It covers a large area and comprises of different types of facilities, such as those for human experiments, for the breeding of test animals, for the research in, production, storage, and transportation of biological weapons, for biological warfare, and for countermeasures against biological warfare. 2. The ruins are relatively completely preserved, and its original purpose is clearly discernible. Much of its physical structures and important features of the structures now extant were basically intact. Deterioration caused by natural weathering has been brought under effective control, and no marked changes have been wrought to the general scope, shape, and structure of the ruins identifiable. 3. The headquarters of Unit 731 was a place integrating research in experimentation, manufacturing, assembly, field trials, and experiments of biological weapons, as well as material storage, test animal breeding, transport, military alert, and provision of daily necessities. It was the core institute for the planning, organization, and implementation of biological warfare of Japanese troops invading China, the largest base for research into and production of biological weapons the world over in history, and a hotbed of biological warfare. 4. Facilities now extant in the ruins amply prove that Unit 731 was a special unit invading Japanese troops engaged in clandestine research into and production of weapons to launch biological and poison gas warfare, and that it has used humans in experiments on frostbite, bacterial infection, and epidemic prevention, which fully indicate its inhuman nature in violation of all accepted norms of human conduct and ethics. 5. The ruins of Unit 731 bears witness to the abhorrent underside of Japan's aggression against China, and to the attempts that were made by Japan to conceal the atrocities it had committed by destroying the evidence. It serves as a memorial to numerous anti-Japanese heroes and innocent civilians who were murdered there. 6. As an important base for education of Chinese people in patriotism and national defense, the ruins of Unit 731 can instill the Chinese people the national spirit of working hard and forging ahead in unity. The site can also stand as a memorial against fascism, alongside the concentration camps of Europe and the zero ground of Hiroshima, reminding the whole world of the need to unite in keeping peace and opposing war. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Summary and Reflections. 70 years have elapsed since the flames of World War II died down. But Japan still refuses to acknowledge all its wartime responsibilities and come to terms with the legacy of the war. Both China and Japan carry the memory of World War II, and both encounter the practical dilemma of national collective unconsciousness. Nowadays, how to handle certain historical issues between China and Japan directly touches on the relations between the two countries. Since the end of World War II, far from admitting or reflecting on Japan's medical crimes during World War II, the Japanese medical community has chosen to remain silent or aloft on the matter, and tended to deny and defend such conduct. Although a number of non-governmental organizations in Japan have appeared to be willing to pursue truth and justice, they have turned out to be too weak to change the voice of Japan's mainstream medical community, which would rather not delve too deep. As a result, the historical perspective of the Japanese medical community has been influenced, and Japan's medical history has been intentionally distorted. Confronted by evidence of abhorrent medical crimes, the Japanese medical community has made little self-examination on the state rationale that led to such abuses of human rights and medical ethics. In this, it epitomizes post-war Japanese mainstream society, characterized by the shirk of responsibility and distortion of history. Medical crimes by doctors of medicine. Since the end of World War II, Japanese mainstream society has tried to conceal and cover up the war crimes, including germ warfare, human experimentation and vivisection, committed by the Japanese army hospitals, field hospitals, and the so-called Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, Unit 731, during the Japanese occupation of China. This is a practical issue both China and Japan have to face. According to records of the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare of Japan, Unit 731 was composed of high-ranking officers, sergeants, privates, and soldiers' dependents. In 1945, the unit comprised 1 lieutenant general, 2 major generals, 5 colonels, 5 lieutenant colonels, 34 majors, 31 captains, 26 lieutenants, 27 second lieutenants, 18 warrant officers, 165 sergeants, 1,018 privates, and 2,208 soldiers' dependents, adding up to 3,540 people. Most generals and colonels of Unit 731 were Army surgeons. Graduates of renowned Japanese universities with medical degrees, many were recognized experts in the fields of bacteriology, serology, limnology, entomology, zoology, and botany. For instance, Shiro Ishii graduated from the School of Medicine, Kyoto Imperial University, with a PhD in microbiology and went on to patent dozens of inventions. Masaji Kitano, the second commander of Unit 731, graduated from the School of Medicine, Tokyo Imperial University, as a medical doctor. Pathologist Kiyono Kenji graduated from Kyoto Imperial University and served as a top advisor to Unit 731. Kiyoshi Kawashima graduated from Tokyo Medical University as a medical doctor. Nagayama Taro, chief of the Diagnosis and Treatment Department of Unit 731, graduated from the School of Medicine, Okayama University, as a medical doctor. And Kawakami Susumu, head of the Pathology Section of Unit 731, graduated from Kyoto Imperial University with a PhD in pathology. More than 200 medical doctors joined Unit 731 after graduating from top Japanese universities to become the core team involved in human experimentation, germ warfare, and research in bacterial infection and epidemic prevention. As the elite of the Japanese medical community, these medical doctors should have applied their social conscience and morality. They should have observed international law and medical ethics. They should have behaved in a professional manner and assumed moral responsibility for their conduct. Instead, they engaged in human experimentation and germ warfare under the guise of patriotism, became accomplices of militarism, and abandoned all humanity, dignity, basic principles of medicine, and professional medical ethics. The active participation of this elite group in the war of aggression against China embodied a Japanese society ruled and influenced by militarism, which had rejected international conventions, social laws, ethics, and humanitarianism, and was ready to commit whatever appalling crimes against humanity. After World War II, instead of being tried for war crimes, all the members of Unit 731 were given immunity by the USA in exchange for their data on biological warfare and human experimentation. Spared trial by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, every one of them escaped unpunished. After the war, many Japanese war criminals went on to secure important positions in government agencies, the military, medical institutions, academic institutions, and universities and colleges. Those who worked in government agencies and military sectors included Uemura Hazimi, former head of the Anthrax Section of Unit 731, working for the Japanese Ministry of Education; Nagatomo Namio, serving as vice governor of Hokkaido; Kaneko Junichi, working in the Japanese Defense Agency; Nakaguro Hidetoshi, acting as president of the Health School of Japan's Self-Defense Forces; and Masuda Miho, a professor in the National Defense Academy of Japan. Those who worked in medical institutions included Yagisawa Kazumasa, head of Unit 731 Plant Research Squad, and Ejima Shinpei, head of Unit 731 Dysentery Research Section, joining the National Institute of Infectious Diseases, NIID. Kasahara Shiro, head of Virus Research Section, serving as deputy director of Kitasato Institute. Those who worked in universities and colleges included Ishimura Hisato, head of Unit 731 Frostbite Section, becoming president of Kyoto Prefectural University of Medicine; Isikawa Tachiyomaru, head of the Unit 731 Pathology Section, later president of Kanazawa University; Okamoto Kuzu, head of Unit 731 Pathology Section, serving as chief of the Department of Medicine in Kyoto University; Hideo Tanaka, head of Unit 731 Insect Section, acting as chief of the Department of Medicine in Osaka City University; Tanabu Nagomu, head of Unit 731 Typhoid Section, and Minato Masao, head of Unit 731 Cholera Section, both becoming professors of Kyoto University, and Miyagawa Tadasi, head of Unit 731 X-ray Section, later professor of the Department of Medicine, University of Tokyo. In addition, many members of Unit 731 founded medical enterprises and private hospitals. For example, Naito Ryuichi, a core member of Unit 731, and Futaki Hideo, head of Unit 731 Tuberculosis Section, jointly founded the Green Cross Corporation, which appointed Masaji Kitano to be top advisor and chief of its Tokyo branch, and appointed Utaguro Itiru, a member of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Southern Army, to be chief of the Kyoto branch. Iguchi Toyokiti, head of Unit 731 Third Section, Sonoda Taro, head of Unit 731 Education Section, and Noguchi Keiti, head of Unit 731 Plague Section, all opened private hospitals after World War II. All of this demonstrates from another perspective that post-war Japanese society was and remains characterized by militarism. Instead of being tried for their war crimes, these criminals became part of the social base that led to the revival of Japanese militarism. The way that the U.S. dealt with Japanese biological warfare criminals epitomizes its approach of handling post-war Japanese issues. Japan's crime of aggression has never been thoroughly exposed and dealt with. The Emperor of Japan was not called to account for the war. Not all the war criminals were punished, and democratic reform was not thoroughly enforced. All of this has foreshadowed the right-wing forces' distortion of Japan's history of aggression, gilding of its invasion against and occupation of other countries with a veneer of respectability, and the revival of the unhealthy tradition of militarism in that country. Although many Japanese extremists and war criminals, including those of biological warfare, had escaped from just trials, Japan, however, can never shirk its responsibility for launching a war of aggression, and the source of the war between China and Japan lied no doubt with Japanese militarism. A questionnaire conducted in Harbin. In 2009, this author guided an internship program of the Law School of Shandong University named A Comparative Study of the Cognitive Status of Different Generations of Urban Residents regarding the historical facts of Unit 731, taking Harbin as example. This program was carried out by means of a questionnaire, of which 300 copies were issued in Harbin's Daoli District, Daowai District, Xiangfang District, and Pingfang District, with 282 effective ones being collected. The respondents were divided into 3 age groups: an elderly group, aged 60 to 79, a middle-aged group, aged 35 to 59, and a youth group, aged 18 to 34, each containing almost the same number of people and sex ratio. The respondents were categorized according to profession, as civil servants, employees of public institutions, students, freelancers, farmers, the unemployed, and retirees. The questionnaire was subdivided in 3 parts. First, the overall level of knowledge of Harbin residents about the history of Unit 731. Second, their attitude toward the application to register the Unit 731 ruins as UNESCO World Heritage. And third, their attitude toward history and the Japanese people. The overall level of knowledge of Harbin residents about the history of Unit 731 are as follows. 95% of Harbin residents knew of Unit 731. Of these, 21% had heard about it. 36% knew a little bit about it. 35% knew some relevant historical facts. And 3% knew the details, in addition to the remaining 5% who knew nothing about it. The knowledge level of residents in Pingfang District, where Unit 731 was stationed regarding the historical fact, was similar to that of all Harbin residents. 93% knew of Unit 731. Of these, 22% had heard about it, 31% knew a little bit about it, 36% knew some relevant historical facts, and 4% knew the details, in addition to the remaining 7% who knew nothing about it. 57% of Harbin people and 53% of Pingfang residents know little about Unit 731's biological warfare, human experimentation, and site protection, while 5% of Harbin people and 7% of Pingfang residents know nothing about Unit 731. These results surprised this author. The investigation team did a follow-up survey and conducted a comprehensive analysis of the people who knew nothing about Unit 731. According to the survey, the reasons why people know nothing about Unit 731 differ according to age group. This is mainly due to their educational experiences and levels. The survey results indicate that many old people knew the history of Unit 731 because of their personal or family experiences. Respondents in the elder group did not know about Unit 731 mainly because they had not been told by the people around them. In the middle age group, respondents know about Unit 731 through TV and books, while others were not interested in the relevant historical facts. In the youth group, respondents knew about Unit 731 through the internet and TV, while others were not interested in the relevant historical facts or had not learned it from textbooks. According to the survey of Unit 731's crimes, Harbin residents tend to know about the germ warfare base in Pingfang District, about the experiments on living human beings, and about the spread of plagues that killed large numbers of civilians. Harbin residents know relatively less about germ warfare in southern China. Based on the survey, 22.5% of Harbin residents knew it very well, 28.2% knew a little, and 48.4% knew little or nothing. According to the survey on the application to record Unit 731 as a site of UNESCO World Heritage status, 60.52% of respondents knew nothing about it. We conducted a random survey on this issue among visitors to the former site of Unit 731, including both Harbin residents and people from other places. Some were in favor of it, while others were opposed. Those who were against it offered such views.
As distinct from tea and food, which can be celebrated as part of a culture, Unit 731 can't be considered to be part of a culture as a result of its bloody history.
A supporter of the application argued,
Since Poland's Auschwitz concentration camp and Japan's Genbaku Dome in Hiroshima have been designated UNESCO World Heritage Sites, the ruins of Unit 731 should also apply for UNESCO World Heritage status so as to attract worldwide attention and gain better protection.
The questionnaire also included Harbin residents' attitude toward Japan. According to the survey results, 87.4% of the respondents believed that the Japanese government was the chief culprit in the war, while 3% disagreed. 36% of the respondents thought that Japanese people should be condemned by the whole world, while 55.5% disagreed. 76.5% of the respondents believed that the Japanese people as a whole should be treated differently from Japanese right-wingers, while 15.1% disagreed. 78.7% of the respondents thought that China's weakness caused the tragedy, while 16.4% disagreed. 66.9% of the respondents opposed the idea that China and Japan should forget history and focus on the future, while 25.3% agree. The survey results indicate that the majority of Harbin residents can rationally treat patriotism and Sino-Japanese relations, while a handful of people hold extreme views. A questionnaire conducted in Tokyo. In 2010, Yoshinaka Takeshi from the Japanese Research Institute of 15 Years of War Medicine and Medical Treatment wrote in his report,
During the Nuremberg trials, 23 Nazi doctors were accused of having been involved in murdering more than 1,300 people. 7 of them received death sentences, leading to the creation of the Nuremberg Principles. However, during the Khabarovsk war crime trials, 12 Japanese doctors were tried as war criminals for killing more than 3,000 people. None of them received the death sentence, and there was no spread effect.
This survey has been conducted from the perspectives of Germany and Japan. After the end of World War II, Germany went through periods of silence, avoidance, and self-examination, and finally decided to face its war crimes. For 20 years following the conclusion of World War II, Germany had never stopped reflecting on the Auschwitz massacre. In 1968, Willy Brandt, an anti-fascist, was elected Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. In 1970, Brandt knelt down at the monument to victims of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, known as the famous Warschauer Kniefall, thereby winning respect for the German government from the international community. In her article entitled German Historians' Post-War Reflection on the Holocaust, Professor Zhang Qianhong drew the following conclusion.
By reviewing the tortuous course of German historians' post-war reflection on the Holocaust, we can obtain important enlightenment. A rational and inclusive national psychology which respects facts and a healthy and responsible historical consciousness complement each other. Holding the correct historical attitude enables Germany to express sympathy to victims and assume its international responsibilities, which is the only way to self-redemption and the reconstruction of national identity. Following the end of World War II, Germany told the world through its own wisdom and actions that the whole nation has stood up since one man knelt down at the monument to the victims of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Repeated ideological reflection has helped Germany discharge a heavy historical burden, dissolve hatred, and win a bright future.
The behavior of the German Chancellor contrasts starkly with that of Japanese leaders. A total of 43 years after Warschauer Kniefall, at the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, JASDF, base in Higashima-Tsushima, Miyagi Prefecture on May 12, 2013, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe smiled and gave a thumbs inside the cockpit of a T-4 training jet plane, which was emblazoned with the number 731. After being made public, Shinzo Abe's photo drew an international backlash. It is inconceivable that Shinzo Abe could not be fully aware of the history of Unit 731. His action reflects the fact that mainstream Japanese society refuses to admit to, reflect on, or apologize for its war responsibilities. On October 10, 2010, the Japanese Research Institute of 15 Years of War Medicine and Medical Treatment gave out questionnaire to medical students in Tokyo. According to the survey results, 17% of the respondents know about Unit 731, 21% had heard about it, and 62% know nothing about it. 68% of the respondents knew about Auschwitz, 27% had heard about it, and 5% knew nothing about it. 69% of the respondents thought that the medical profession should acknowledge the truth and offer an apology. 25% had no idea, and 6% disagreed. 75% of the respondents believe that war crimes still produce an impact now. 19% had no idea, and 6% disagreed. On the whole, the medical students knew little about the history and actions of Unit 731, while 62% of them knew nothing at all. In contrast, they know much more about Auschwitz. This is precisely because Japan has covered up its medical crimes since the end of the war and blanked their history from the pages of Japanese medical education. Most of these medical students believe that the medical profession should acknowledge the truth and offer an apology, and that war crimes still produce an impact on today's Japan and its relations with the rest of the world. German scholar Jan Werner Müller wrote in his book Another Country, German Intellectuals, Unification and National Identity.
In a country without history, whoever injects the memory, defines the concept, and explains the past will win the future.
Remembering and being educated about atrocities has become a critical issue for the medical communities and the wider public in both Japan and China. A medical community which lacks a sense of responsibility will inevitably come into conflict and confrontation with historians who uphold educational consciousness. Those surveys carried out in Harbin and Tokyo by Chinese and Japanese scholars can help us understand Unit 731's influence on today and on the future, to reflect on educational issues, and to set the direction of the next steps. Effort should be devoted to pressing Japan to recognize and reflect on the medical crimes carried out during the war, and to dealing with the lack of attention and concern of the part of Chinese society about Japan's medical crimes. In this regard, national education and publicity and exchanges are very necessary, especially since the National Public Memorial Day of the Nanjing Massacre was declared in 2014. It has become more important for China to deal with the lack of attention and concern on the part of its people about Japanese war crimes. War and Medicine, a magazine compiled by the Japanese Research Institute of 15 years of war medicine and medical treatment, pointed out,
It is an important and necessary subject to reflect on medical ethics during Japan's aggressive war against China, and especially the involvement of Japan's Medical Association and Doctors Association, and on the human experimentation and vivisection conducted by Japanese doctors, which continued even after the war. However, no real effort has been made over the past 6 decades to sincerely confront and 180 draw lessons from the facts about Unit 731.
In September 1947, Doctors' Associations of 45 countries held a meeting of the World Association of Doctors, at which delegates discussed atrocities committed by members of the German and Japanese Doctors' Associations during World War II. They passed a resolution stipulating that German and Japanese Doctors' Associations must issue self-examination statements prior to their accession. On joining the World Association of Doctors in 1951, the Japanese Doctors Association issued a statement denouncing the cruelties inflicted on the peoples of Japan's adversaries, and especially by Japanese doctors, on patients during the war. The magazine War and Medicine commented on the above statement.
This is the first time that a Japanese organization has mentioned this issue. However, it cannot be seen as a sincere reflection by Japanese doctors on the act of war or as lessons learned from it.
Although significant progress has been made in the medical field, and medical workers have been faced up with more and more specific requirements and constraints, the Japanese medical community still tries to avoid this issue. It seems to expect that doctors' atrocities will gradually be forgotten with the passage of time, and that medical war criminals, including members of Unit 731 and their descendants, will thus escape any consequences. Looking back on the 1951 statement, it seems clear that it was an insincere acknowledgement offered by the Japanese Doctors Association solely for the purpose of joining the World Association of Doctors. Professor Asami Shuzu wrote in his article, Medical Crimes During 15 Years of War and Issues We Are Faced with Today.
Doctors and medical workers who were involved in medical crimes during the war knew perfectly well that their actions were an offense against humanity, but their lack of a profound recognition of this means that they cannot be considered as genuine experts. As for those who conducted human experimentation, we cannot call them doctors or scientists. Even though there were no rules of the Nuremberg trials at that time, doctors and medical workers should always take the principle of non-maleficence as their top priority.
In 2003, American professor Michael J. Franzblau asked the Japanese medical community to engage in deep and proper reflection on Unit 731. He warned that a refusal to mention the issue of Unit 731 was a profound disgrace. Professor Asami Shuzu said, at the end of his article,
I think the Japanese community has to engage in deep reflection at this very moment and ask themselves what was the true story of these veiled medical crimes. The issue of Unit 731 has been disclosed since the end of the war. However, the Japanese medical community continues to make excuses for the perpetrators due to a sense of inferiority. What makes them feel inferior? Because they knew at that time what Ishii and his troops were doing. It was an open secret. If this is the reason why they continue to keep silent, their silence is a crime.
End of Chapter 7. End of Japan's biological warfare in China.